It was an ordinary Monday afternoon when me husband Alex casually dropped some surprising news. He had been asked to attend a week-long business trip overseas, which meant I would be alone in the house. For the first time in years, thought I knew it was part of his job. A pang of anxiety surged through me at the thought of being by myself for that long. Alex smiled, packed his bags, and assured me that he would check in every night. He kissed me on the forehead and waved as he left. Once he was gone, house felt eerily quiet to empty, almost like it wasn't mine anymore. I tried to fill the silence by busying myself with work, binge watching my favorite shows, and taking long walks around the neighborhood. The first 2 days passed without much trouble, but by the third evening something changed. I was curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, trying to distract myself with a book, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a flicker of unease mixed with curiosity ran through me. When he opened the door, there stood Ryan, Alex's best friend. He had a bottle of wine in one hand, and that familiar easy smile on his face. "Hey Emma," he said casually. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing." Alex mentioned his trip, and I figured you might want some company. I laughed nervously and stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't have to do that, but it's nice to see you." Ryan and Alex had been inseparable since college. Their friendship, built on years of shared experiences and loyalty. I had known Ryan for almost as long as I had known Alex, but we had never spent much time alone together. It was always the three of us or a larger group. He was a part of our lives, a constant presence. But one I had never thought much about beyond his role as Alex's best friend. We settled in the living room, pouring the wine. As we caught up on life, we talked about work, our mutual friends, and how Alex was adjusting to his trip. Conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew, Edie was laughing more than I had in days. Ryan had a way of making everything feel lighter, and that night I realized I had never truly noticed how charming and genuinely kind he could be. As the evening, or on a subtle shift, occurred between us, there was an ease in the way Ryan listened to me. His attention was focused entirely on what I was saying. It felt good, refreshing, even. I hadn't felt this kind of connection in a long time. At one point I noticed his gaze lingered in me a little longer than usual. It wasn't inappropriate, but it felt different, charged with something unspoken. There was a tension, and though neither of us acknowledged it, I could feel it settling in the air. I brushed it off, the feeling, telling myself it was just the wine, the loneliness of being away from Alex, or maybe even my imagination. After all, Ryan was Alex's best friend, and I was Alex's wife. There was no reason to read into anything. I excused myself, saying it was getting late, and Ryan smiled, thanking me for the company. As soon as the door closed behind him, a strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something had shifted, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. The next morning I woke up feeling unsettled. The evening with Ryan played on my mind more than it should have. I told myself it was nothing, just the result of having company after a few lonely days. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. There was a strange undercurrent in our conversation that I hadn't noticed at the time but couldn't ignore now. I tried to distract myself with work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan and the way I felt in his presence. By late afternoon, the unease became too much to bear. I picked up the phone and called my best friend Sophie, the one person who would listen without judgment. "So Ryan came by last night," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Ryan, Alex's friend, asked Sophie." She wanted her voice immediately curious, "Just to check in, I guess. We had some wine and talked. It was nice." But I hesitated, not sure how to put my feelings into words. But what she pressed aside. There was this moment, I can't really explain it. It wasn't anything beautiful. It felt like something. Sophie was silent for a moment. "And what did he do exactly?" "Nothing," I quickly replied. "That's the thing, it wasn't anything specific. It was more like a feeling, like we both knew something we weren't supposed to. Maybe it was just the wine talking." Sophia furred. "It sounds like you're overthinking it." "Maybe," I said it, though I wasn't convinced. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to put that conversation out of my mind, but Ryan seemed to occupy every corner of my thoughts. It was absurd, really. He was just being a good friend. I told myself there was no need to blow things out of proportion. Later that evening, as I sat down for dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "Had a great time last night. Hope I didn't stay too long." I stared at the message, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't quite explain. It upped out a few different replies before settling on something simple. "Not at all. It was nice to have company." A few minutes later, another message came. "Glad to hear that. I was thinking of stopping by again tomorrow if you're free. No pressure, of course." I hesitate, feeling a mix of anticipation and guilt swirling inside. Part of me wanted to say no to avoid whatever this was turning into, But another part, the part that had felt lonely and disconnected for days, was tempted. Nothing would happen, I reassured myself. It was just another friendly visit. Sure, tomorrow works, I replied. Before I could overthink it, the next day was a blur of nervous energy. I found myself thinking about Ryan's visit with a mixture of excitement and dread. Was I setting myself up for something I couldn't control, or was it all in my head? That evening, when Ryan arrived again, he brought takeout and we sat down at the kitchen table sharing a meal like we had countless times before, but this time the tension between us was undeniable. Every laugh, every glance felt charged, as if we were both aware of the unspoken connection between us, but were too afraid to acknowledge it. As the evening wore on, I found myself drawn to Ryan in a way that made me feel both excited and terrified. There was a familiarity between us that felt comforting but also dangerous. I caught myself wondering what it would be like if things were different, if we weren't tied to other people. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Ryan, do you ever wonder what would happen if we weren't tied to anyone else?" He looked at me surprised but not shocked. There was a long pause before he answered, his voice quiet but firm. "I've thought about it more than I should." My heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't expected that response, and the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. "I'm sorry," I stammered, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. "I shouldn't have said that." Ryan shook his head. "No, don't apologize. I felt it too, but I don't want to mess anything up. You and Alex, that's sacred." His words hung in there heavy with the weight of what we're both feeling. I nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment settle over my I whispered, "I love Alex." "I know," Ryan said softly, "and I respect that, but it should being around you sometimes." For a long moment we sat in silence, both of us processing the reality of what was happening. We had acknowledged something that neither of us wanted to admit, and no, there was no going back. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, and we were dangerously close to crossing it. Ryan stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "He should go before we do something we can't take back." I nodded, unable to speak, and watched as he walked out the door. The house felt even emptier than before, and I was left with the complicated mess of emotions swirling inside me. The day after Ryan's second visit, I woke up feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. On one hand, I was glad we had come to our senses before things spiraled out of control, but on the other hand, I couldn't stop thinking about the intensity of our conversation, about how close we had come to doing something that could ruin everything. Alex called later that morning, his voice warm and familiar, but I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at me. He talked about his trip and how much he missed me, and I tried to respond as normally as possible, but I felt like I was living in two worlds, one where I was Alex's loving wife and another where Ryan had stirred something in me that I wasn't ready to confront. Later that evening, I decided to call Ryan. I needed to make sure everything was still normal between us, that we hadn't crossed any irreversible line. I said when he answered, my voice uncertain. "I just wanted to make sure we're okay after last night." There was a pause. "Yeah, we're fine," he said, but his tone lacked the lightness it usually had. "Are you sure? I don't want things to be weird between us," I pressed. Ryan hesitated. "Edel, it's not weird, but I think we need to be careful. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." I knew he was right. I agree. I didn't want to ruin anything. "Neither do I," Ryan said, "but it's hard to ignore." After hung up, I felt a strange sense of finality. Was the right decision, but it didn't feel like a victory. Something had shifted between us, and there was no going back. The next few days passed in a haze of emotions. I couldn't quit a process. I threw myself into work trying to forget the tension between Ryan and him, but it lingered in the back of my mind. Alex was due back in a couple off days, and I was determined to put everything behind me before he returned. But the day before Alex came home, I got a text from Ryan. "Can we talk?" My heart sank. I knew I shouldn't respond, but part of me couldn't resist. There were things left unsaid, unresolved. "Sure," I typed back, me stomach turning with anxiety. That evening Ryan came over again. We sat on the couch, both of us avoiding eye contact, the weight of our last conversation hanging between us. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, finally breaking the silence. "I should have texted you. I just have been struggling with everything." And he didn't know what else to do. I shook my head. "It's not your fault. We both let this get out of hand." Ryan nodded. "I know, but I can't stop thinking about you, and that's the problem. I don't want to feel this way, but I do." I swallowed hard, feeling my own emotions rise to the surface. "We can't do this, Ryan. It's not fair to Alex or to us." "You're right," he said quietly, "but it doesn't make it any easier." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The pull between us was undeniable. I knew that if we crossed the line, there would be no going back. The temptation was there, but I couldn't give in. "I can't," he whispered. "I love Alex, and I can't hurt him." Ryan stood up, his expression serious. "Signed, I know, and I respect that." I shook my head. "It's not your fault, Webbeth. Let this get out of hand." Ryan nodded. "I know, but I can't stop thinking about That's the problem. I don't want to feel this way, but I do. Swallowed hard, feeling my own emotions rise to the surface. We can't do this, Ryan. It's not fair to Alex. Or to you. So you're right, he said quietly, but it doesn't make it any easier. For a moment neither of us spoke. The pull between us undeniable. I knew that if we crossed the line there would be no going back. The temptation was there, but I couldn't give in. I can't, I whispered. I love Alex. And I can hurt him. Ryan stood up, his expression serious but resigned. I know and I respect that. He paused at the door, turning to look at me one last time. For what it's worth, I care about you, but I wouldn't be the one want to ruin your marriage. And with that he was gone. When Alex came home the next day, I hugged him tightly, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, but deep down I knew that a part of me had shifted on. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't erase what had almost happened. Ryan and I never spoke of it again. We drifted back into the background of each other's lives, but the unspoken connection we had shared left a mark, one that neither of us would ever forget. As the door closed behind Ryan, I was left with a heavy heart, knowing that we had come dangerously close to crossing a line. I had chosen my marriage, but it didn't feel like a complete victory. The emotions stirred within me left a mark, and that would take time to fade. Sometimes the boundaries we think are wrestled can bend under the weight of unspoken feelings, but is staying on the right side of that line always enough to maintain the trust and love that a relationship is built on? What would you have done in my shoes?